Safety and ADA compliance for the Department of Natural Resources. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about recreation. I saw that not too many hands went up, but I was also the state of Indiana's ADA coordinator back when the initial signing of the ADA happened. And when I found out that I would get better results from actually training an ADA coordinator within each agency, they said, well, we've got an ADA coordinator in each agency. Why do we need to have you? So I started working for the Department of Natural Resources as their ADA coordinator. So at any rate, I don't know if you feel like this guy. I don't know if you can see the screen very well, but you've got a guy buried up to his neck in the sand there. And you know what you've got when you've got an ADA coordinator buried up to his neck in the sand? You've got a shortage of sand. Okay. I don't know if you've thought about this before or not, but we touched on it in some of the comments earlier. The work that you're doing in regards to complying with the ADA helps a number of people, but it also beyond people with disabilities. And when I travel around, I don't travel around by myself. I travel around usually with my family or my friends. I do have one or two friends. And it allows me to be able to go and participate with my family and friends as opposed to having to do a special, separate, segregated program. But also, have you thought about the fact that, I know you've seen this before, curb cuts. Invariably, you'll see people with strollers, you'll see bicyclists, you'll see skateboarders, people who can't handle steps very well, utilizing those as well. But also, if we're talking about recreation programs, I see a lot of folks using coolers, those rolling coolers, using the ramps or the curb ramps. You're going to be providing access to a number of other entities. For example, first responders benefit from having that kind of access. So you're not only benefiting people with disabilities, but you're also benefiting people who might have a disability, a temporary disability, somebody who's traveling with somebody with a disability, but also people who just plain and simply benefit from having that kind of access. So it's something to think about, frankly, that we don't happen to do that very frequently. Now, when I talk about the Department of Natural Resources, I don't talk about built-up environments. I talk about the natural resources. Okay, we have to maintain that nature in my job. We have to include people with disabilities without compromising the program itself. Some of you all have programs. Have you got historic sites in any of your properties, any of your facilities? Okay, obviously brings on a number of different challenges as well, because you have to maintain that historical integrity. But also, I have to retain safety and make sure that we don't provide something that's going to create situations where you're going to put people in hazardous situations. Also, we consider a variety of limitations and abilities in the programs that I administer. We think outside the box. You've heard that before, but also understand that some places just plain and simply are not going to be made accessible. Have you ever been to the Grand Canyon? Any of you? We don't have a railing around that, right? You just simply can go right off the edge of that thing, but you're also not going to provide a ramp down to the bottom of that. We do have donkey trails if you want to ride a donkey. The Department of Justice, for those of you who are relatively new to this whole ADA thing, the Department of Justice has identified priorities that we look at as we're trying to make sure that we're complying with accessibility requirements. In Title III of the ADA, which is the public accommodations ones, they have identified these basic priorities. And the first priority they've identified is parking, or the front door, the entrance. Now, for you all, your front door may be the courthouse. And I will tell you that as a person with a disability, if I go to one of our courthouses, if I go to one of our cities, and I see that they haven't got the parking correct, in other words, they don't have the signage that's 60 inches from the bottom edge of the sign to the pavement, if they don't have a van accessible parking sign there, if they don't have the access aisles right, then I'm pretty sure that you're not going to have the rest of the property correct. So that sends a message to a lot of people with disabilities as we're trying to examine where we're going to be going, what we're going to be doing. So I would say for you all, if you don't have that front door correct, that would be your priority. Identify the parking, make sure that you've got it located in the correct places. The next thing, the next priority is services. Basically, when I think of services, it's what's the attraction? What do people come to the Department of Natural Resources to do? If it's Clifty Falls, what do you hope to be able to get to? Clifty Falls, right? If we're talking about Brown County, you want to go to the lodge, right? The Abe Martin Lodge. These are the services that I have to identify and then, again, prioritize, recognizing that not everything is going to be accessible. The third priority is bathrooms, restrooms, pit toilets, comfort stations, showers. I got to tell you, I am a connoisseur of pit toilets at this point, and it's not a pleasant thing to do. The last priority is everything else. Drinking fountains. Does anybody have public telephones any longer? Do you? Okay. Those are usually out of order, but obviously have to be made accessible as well. This is an example of what my front door looks like. This is not done correctly. I don't want to give you the impression that that's a correct parking space. Does anybody know what's wrong with that parking space? It's in the state of Indiana. The signage is probably right. The sign is the correct height. But the thing that's wrong with this, if you're in the state of Indiana, you're required to use blue paint for the access aisles and for the parking spaces. If you want to write this down, if you look at Indiana Code 5-16-9, that's 5-16-9, that's where you'll find the requirements for blue paint. And I'll tell you why that's necessary or why it's required. You're not going to find it in the ADA. The ADA is silent about the color you have to use. It just has to be designated in such a way that you discourage parking in the access aisles. And it's also identified with the international symbol of accessibility on the sign. The problem is, and this is what you wind up, that question earlier about the new building, new construction, the problem is that many people don't know what the ADA's requirements are. And also, in Indiana, our building inspectors don't inspect for compliance with the ADA. They inspect for compliance with Chapter 11 of the building code. So if you ask somebody to make sure that you comply with the ADA, they may say that's not their job. The Indiana building codes inspectors don't inspect for compliance with the ADA. They inspect for compliance with the Indiana building code, Chapter 11. Now that's consistent with the ADA in terms of its requirements, and that's why you have to say in your language, in your contract language, that they agree to comply with all applicable state and federal regulations. When they say that, they're agreeing to comply with Chapter 11 of the building code as well as the ADA, because they're also required to comply with that in your facilities. So if you put that contract language in your contract, then you can go back to them and say you failed to comply with the applicable state and federal regulations. The parking and the path and the entrance. In other words, once you get from the parking, you have to make sure that the accessible route to your parking or to your facility, to your entrance, the front door, is accessible. And that means firm and stable surface. That means grades not greater than 5% without a ramp. That means width-wise, all those sorts of things. Here's an example. If you've been to Fort Harrison State Park, you'll recognize this. It's a parking area right at the duck pond that leads into an accessible picnic area. And our services includes things like shooting ranges. And let me get through all these. Those are some of the kinds of services that we have at the properties that we have to pay attention to. Here's an example of an area where we included not only accessible picnicking, but also an accessible grill and accessible fishing. So you go fishing, take your fish up, put it on the grill, have a nice meal. That is I want to say, no, it's not. It's shoot. It might be Shakamak. I'm thinking it might be Shakamak. We also have public access sites. We've got about 370 public access sites across the state that range anywhere from just a simple boat launch to something like this, where you've actually got a loading area you can transfer onto your boat to get into your boat from that surface. Here's a nice pier at Sylvan Lake. We've got a lot of properties that I think are really worthwhile. I left you with a recreation guide. I don't know if you've seen it. Do you have it? Go ahead and pull that out and take a look at the page 2, I think it is. There's a guide that talks about, see the icons on the left-hand side? One more page. Right there. If you take a look at that, you'll see that there's an icon that has dotted lines around the outside of it. That means that that property has features on it that are accessible. That doesn't mean that the properties are all accessible. It just means that for example, if those dotted lines are around the outside of campsites, that means that there are campsites there that are accessible. Now, I was asked to be able to provide a recreation guide that was simply a guide for people with disabilities, and I've hesitated to do that because not everybody with a disability can access something that's ADA compliant, and in turn, some people with disabilities can access things that are not necessarily fully ADA compliant. Plus, if I say that, you missed out on the opportunity to go to a property that may have some features that you would want to go to. So we've kind of resisted putting out a rec guide with that. Did you not pick one up, Richard? Okay. Thanks for bringing those around. Get a rec guide? Is there a rec guide in that? Nope. It's a separate book that I... There you go. Thank you, ma'am.
Did you guys
and in that rec guide, just like Matt, in that rec guide is a listing of every property that we've got in the state, along with our fishing regulations and that sort of thing. Yes, Matt.
Oh, no, I was curious, and you can pass on this question if you think it's too long. But I was curious about like DNR, because I'm thinking in terms of like that probably won't be one of the justifications for say a county who has, they say they already did their transition plan back when they were supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, with the 2010 and some of the new areas covered by the ADA, that would probably be one of the justifications as to why I would encourage a county government to redo their transition plan, because you're talking about a lot of things that up until the revisions hadn't been technically covered by the ADA.
Right. What Matt's asking about is the reason for going back and revisiting your transition plan, basically. And I would strongly encourage that for a number of reasons. One is that there are a lot of pieces of property that have new features on it. You've done new construction that may have been made obsolete, the old construction. It may be that you've got some facilities that are no longer in use or no longer used the same way. So revisiting the transition plan is vitally important. Also, in terms of the compliance with the regulations, like I said, the 2010 standards, the ADA's 2010 standards, obviously were implemented in 2010. Up to that point, you were using the ADA's accessibility guidelines for your reference. There are a lot of things that were changed from the ADA's 1991 standards that are different in the 2010 standards. So you're going to have to update your transition plan to make sure that the new construction you're doing is compliant with the 2010 standards. Okay. This is kind of an interesting story, and I share this because at Loblaw Le Marsh up in northern Indiana, we had a school that kept coming out to the marsh area with their classes at the end of the year. And one year they had an individual who was a wheelchair user, and she was only able to go to the parking lot and could not go out to the marshy area with her students. So we found out the school was interested in helping us make this area accessible. We put a bridge over the marsh so that this child could actually go with her classmates to visit. And when we did this, the local politicians got involved, the newspaper got involved, and all of a sudden we've got all sorts of people out there shaking hands and kissing babies. And you wind up getting that kind of interest, that kind of involvement, and you're going to find yourself a whole lot better and a whole lot more popular when it comes time to put the thing in. So what we did was instead of, when I talk about a firm and stable surface, I'm not necessarily talking about asphalt or concrete or boardwalk. I'm talking about, we use what we call -2 gravel, which is about 1/4 of an inch in diameter. And then we pack it down for about 3 inches, put stone dust in it, and then wet that down and stabilize it again with another layer of dust. And we wind up with a firm and stable surface that I think I've got a picture. This is McCormick's Creek Trail. It's as natural as you can get and still be firm and stable and just about as hard as concrete. The interesting thing about this is that if you think about it, when you travel on a trail, it's not necessarily light. It could be relatively dark. And for somebody with a vision disability or low vision, this is going to provide them a really nice, clear distinction between the trail and the grass or the drop-off that they're going on. So I like using that in our areas as well. And you can see snakes crossing too, yeah. Oh, it can be, yeah. We were doing playground inspections. Our playground inspector was heading out to Brown County to do an inspection on the playground, and he gets out there, and there's this big 6-foot rattlesnake, timber rattler, sitting there across the parking lot of the, just sunning himself. But they won't bother you if you don't bother them. So anyway, this is the look at McCormick's Creek that is right across from the inn. What we did here was we took the natural terrain. Now, this cabin is not an accessible cabin, but we wanted to provide good access up to the cabin, so we just used the natural terrain and raised that sidewalk up. You used to have steps going in there. Everybody going into that cabin is going to be dragging their suitcases in, too, so we made sure that we provided good access there as well. Like I said, restrooms, small toilets, comfort stations, portable toilets. Now, this is really, I put this on here to remind myself to tell you guys, if you ever see an advertisement that says it meets all ADA requirements, I would look at that with such a skewed eye, because this is a company that I will not mention, but we bought a bunch of these things and bought them before I got on there. When I got there, the ADA coordinator asked me to go out and take a look at them. I don't know if you can tell it or not from this picture, but the grab bar that's on the back wall of that raised toilet seat, it goes further away the further you do the transfer. So instead of being straight across the back wall there, it gets further away from the individual. If you can imagine trying to reach further and further, the further out you get, the less strength you've got to be able to push onto that grab bar. It does not meet ADA requirements. It does not meet the compliance requirements for the turning radius inside. And besides, when you see somebody helping a guy into the restroom, holding the door open for him, that sends a bad message in a number of different ways, okay? I don't know what he was planning on doing there, helping this guy into the bathroom, but not everybody who says they're ADA compliant really are ADA compliant. These are some vault toilets that we're buying now that are much more accessible. You see how the bathroom is big enough to wheel around in, and the grab bars are straight across. We also have gone, through a couple of other changes there and made sure that we thought outside the box again for some of our areas. We couldn't lower the counter here, but some guys who register to go fishing and sign papers and that sort of thing, we provided a flip-down tray there for somebody to be able to write. This is another good one. This is down at Clifty Falls that we provided a nice shelter, and it looks like we forgot to put the other bench in, but really what we did was provide an area for strollers, for chairs, to be able to protect themselves underneath that bench and be able to sit next to the person that they're with. This is kind of a unique one. It's a loading platform for folks that are going down a boat ramp to be able to transfer when, instead of in the water, they can transfer off of that platform and get into their boat that way. That way they can hang onto the rail and then go into their boat. Points to remember, and this has been mentioned, and I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it again because it's an important thing. That is to involve others. If you involve people with disabilities, not only are you going to get buy-in from the community, but you're also going to get a perspective that you may not have thought about before. And it's better to have that perspective, have that involvement, than it is to, tell them that this is what you're going to do. I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase, but it's a really good one to remember as you're doing things. Nothing about us without us. In other words, if you include people with disabilities in your designs, in your development, in your planning stages, you're going to get buy-in from them as well as support from them when things go south. Terminology, I'm not going to talk too much about this because there are different terminologies that when you're talking about recreation programs, you need to look and see whether or not you're dealing with a trail or you're dealing with an outdoor recreation access route or if you're dealing with an access route. There are three different terms that include somewhat similar things because they carry with them different requirements. For example, a trail is not going to be as developed as an access route is. You're going to have an access route inside your city streets, your concrete sidewalks. Those are access routes. They require with them grades and cross slopes that are much less than you would find on a trail or an outdoor recreation access route. But just understand that there are different reasons, different purposes for those. This is an outdoor developed area that leads down to a pier over at Monroe Lake. We take into, let me get through this. These are the kinds of things that you need to pay attention to as you're looking at the routes that you're going to be going through. And you have to pay attention to all of those together. You can't separate out, well, they've got good grades, but we got a horrible cross slope. And then also some tips as you're walking through the area, pay attention to that 80 inches headroom that you're required to have as well. But anything sticking out into the path, that doorway as you're walking along that's more than 4 inches is going to cause problems for somebody with a vision disability. Okay? I'm running through an awful lot of stuff, but I wanted to make sure that you got those numbers. If you don't remember anything else, make sure you get the Great Lakes ADA Center numbers, the 1-800-2 949-4232, because that's the number that you will find you would be very valuable. I know that some of you guys went to Chicago this last week or 2 weeks ago. How long has it been now? Has it been a month? Oh my God. Okay. The Great Lakes ADA Center is very involved in the ADA centers are all involved in those symposiums. If you haven't been, you might consider going. It's an incredibly valuable experience. There, you're going to meet people with not only with disabilities, but also the people who write the rules and regulations for the Department of Justice, as well as the Access Board. If you want to give me a call, my number's up there, 317-232-4145. If you want my cell phone, I'll be more than happy to give that to you as well, because I'm not always in the office. And that is 317-979-8893. 317-979-8893. Bleh. 317-979-8893. Okay, any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
So if we have Yellowwood State Forest
Yes.
in Brown County, and the shelter house there, they have some concrete going almost to it, so not to the shelter house.
Sorry, that's my alarm for stopping.
Um,
They have
and
concrete going to Yellowwood's shelter?
to the shelter house. There's
Mhm.
only just the one shelter house there.
Right.
And they have concrete going almost to it, but not to it. And then they have Brown County stone pathways, which you cannot, anyone walking across it, it's easily, you could fall. I mean, it's Brown County stone to walk on, it's not the best thing to walk on.
Right.
But we have two of our family reunions are there every year. And the older that some of the people get, is there a way that, who would we talk to in regards to possibly getting the concrete all the way up to the shelter, maybe even in the shelter house?
You just did.
Really?
Yeah.
Is the ADA equipment is there?
Yeah.
It's a
Um,
your
Right,
property, right?
if you want to call the State Forest, call Jack Seifert. Jack Seifert, Seifert, and tell him that you ran into me and you want to see about getting that done.
Because they did it, they got almost to the shelter house, and then it just like stopped at a really weird angle.
Okay.
How do you guys approach, like, for instance, shelter? Because on one state property, you can have multiple shelter houses. Do you look at a percentage of these are on an accessible?
The question is whether or not we have to basically make all of our shelters accessible, or we look at a percentage of those. And the thing that we have to look at is program accessibility. And I don't know if you're familiar with that term or not, but program accessibility is a term that's required in Title II of the ADA that says when we view our programs and services and activities in their entirety, they have to not discriminate against people with disabilities. Now, when you view it in its entirety, that means that not everyone has to be accessible, not everyone has to comply. We want to shoot towards that. But in terms of compliance with the ADA, we have to make sure that we have provided a certain number of them in an accessible manner. Now, that doesn't go for parking, that doesn't go for benches, for example, that doesn't go for playgrounds, because there are percentages that are required in each one of those. But for our shelters, for example, our programs of shelters, we have to make sure that there is a number that, again, when viewed in their entirety, we've dispersed them appropriately. We have an equal opportunity for people to participate in lake views, in marshy views, in wooded views, and that sort of thing. So we have to look at it from the perspective of what do we have, what have we provided, and then once we've provided those accessible, then we can expand beyond that. But in terms of Yellowwood, like I said, you just talk to me, and I will go back to the office tomorrow, and I'll have a conversation with Jack and see what we can do.
Because we've been kind of floating around not having one of them there because it's can't get a wheelchair, you can't, someone with a cane or a walker, it's terrible. There's no lighting in the shelter house. And we've
Well,
had-
I'll smack them around for you.
I mean, my family's been there, family reunion there since way back in the 60s, every year.
Belinda, do me a favor, or Brenda,
Uh-huh.
do me a favor and send me an email, okay, at redwards@dnr.in.gov. And remind me, but if I don't talk to him on tomorrow, then you have my permission to smack me around too.
And I know it's not like a state park where they're paying admission to get in.
No, it's part of our programs, it's part of our services, and it's part of our requirements to make sure that they're as accessible as.
I mean, they made the bathrooms better. I mean,
Mhm.
that's awesome. And like I say, there's a path almost there. It sucks.
We'll get it.
So, I'm just curious, and does anyone else have a question? I feel like I'm
Sorry.
hogging Rick's time. And so, like, for instance, Monroe County has two parks that they maintain, Karst Farm and then this Flatwoods. And I'm looking at the trails that you show on McCormick's Creek.
Mhm.
Is that what I should expect of the trails that they have, like walking trails? And I don't think, they could probably do a better job maintaining them because.
Well, it depends, because Matt's asking about the kind of trails that he should be expecting to see. We've got the Knobstone Trail that we're responsible for that crosses the entire state. I don't know if has anybody heard of the Knobstone Trail before? Okay, the Knobstone Trail is a very rustic, rough trail. It's not designed for people with disabilities, but when we put new sections of the trail in, then we try and make sure that that's as compliant as possible with the outdoor recreation guidelines. And those surfaces can be firm and stable. Some of them are not. Some of them, the cross slopes are such that you're not going to be able to easily walk them. It's not what that program is designed for. But we also have trails at the Indiana Dune State Park that are on boardwalk so that people with disabilities can maneuver those. We've also purchased a number of chairs at some of our properties. McCormick's Creek has one, Potato has one, Lincoln has one, Pokagon has one, and these are power chairs that you can, if you've got a mobility disability, you just simply go to the property, show your credit card or ID, because we need to make sure that you're going to return it. And it's like I said, it's a power chair that has four-wheel drive that you can be able to take it out on some trails that are not compliant. So that way we've allowed for anybody to be able to go wherever they want to instead of saying you've got to go in this particular area. So that's one of the things we've done to try and make sure that we've provided program accessibility. Okay, any other questions? You guys having a good time?
I am now.
Okay.
Because
Well,
we have
yeehaw.
our reunion thing.
I'm just curious, how involved is your Parks and Rec in your plan?
We're working on it.
I